with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Our guest today is Nancy Bodine. She is here to celebrate her new book, What Do You See? Developing New Perspectives with Quilt Patterns. Before we invite Nancy into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. If you're on Twitter, it's at Jedley Magic. We would also love for you to connect with us on our YouTube channel, Reading With Your Kids. And of course, you can visit us on our website, readingwithyourkids.com. And also, please check out our new website, Drawing With Your Kids. That is a fantastic page with all sorts of great lessons that can help you and your kids draw some of the most beloved characters that we have celebrated here on the Reading With Your Kids podcast. And of course, at readingwithyourkids.com, you can use the contact button at the top of the page to send us a message. Let us know what we're doing well, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the Reading With Your Kids podcast. Join us right now from Cape Canaveral in the wonderful state of Florida, where she just watched a rocket launch into space. I'm so excited. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But we're mainly going to be talking about her brand new picture book. It's called What Do You See? Developing New Perspectives with Quilt Patterns. Please welcome to the show the author known as Miss Nancy, the Quilt Lady, Nancy Bodine. Nancy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I'm excited to have you on. First, let's just get the rocket out of the rocket in the room out of the way. What was that like? You watched the SpaceX rocket go up into space and then watch the rockets land again. What was that like?
It was, we're so close to where they actually launch. We're only about a mile from the launch pad. So you feel the ground shake. And then, on the sky, you see this glow and then this huge light. It looks like its own sun is, goes rising in an arc out of the sky, and you watch it cross the sky, and then it will cause what they call, like a jellyfish effect of lights that just blossoms out when it discharges the boosters from the rocket, when they've done their job and they need to come back down. And then you watch the boosters come down, and when they get glowing red when they're going through that really the reentry process. And then when they land, the rockets shoot off to slow them down coming down. And then a few seconds after they land, you hear these two big sonic booms, and it just reverberates everywhere. And the thing that made it really special for me this time was that there was a family from Germany near us on the beach, and we had chatted with them a bit before the rocket launched, and watching or just listening to their reactions, these were definitely, real well-educated people who had made a point to come to Cape Canaveral to see, what we can do with space. And it was just to hear their awe and amazement at it made you proud,
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I think that this is a good lead-in to your book, because SpaceX, NASA, the moon launch many decades ago, it wouldn't have happened unless humanity came together in a kind of patchwork and shared their different talents and abilities to create this I don't want to say miracle, but it's seemingly something that, I think my grandfather would have had a hard time believing could happen. And
it's truly an out of this world experience.
Yeah. And it was only possible because people of different backgrounds, different talents, different parts of the world came together to work together for a common cause. And if I'm not mistaken, that's a big part of what your book is all about.
Yes, it is. My book has learning activities included in it. And one of them is very specific about diversity appreciation. And it involves using coffee filters, and the kids replicate one of the quilt patterns in the book on a coffee filter. And then we, have them study it and look at how beautiful this creation of theirs is. And then you put all the coffee filters on the floor, like in a grid, so that they look like that particular quilt pattern. And then the kids get to look at it and see how adding everyone else's creativity makes the whole even more interesting and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your book. It's a picture book, and you said there's not a whole lot of words in the book. It's mainly illustrations of these quilts from all over the world?
I would say that most of them in this book are traditional American patterns.
Okay.
That's what I'm most familiar with. When I was the Quilt Lady and teaching fourth graders as a volunteer historical reenactor, I use a lot of American quilt lore to teach kids our local history and to engage them, in the whole story that we made up when they sat down around me. And so my book, it's, they say, write what you know, write what's your passion. Mm-hmm. And quilts are definitely a big passion of mine and something that I have done a lot of studying to be able to make my presentations to the children really interesting and engaging. Mm. So that's why they're mostly American quilts, because that's what I'm familiar with.
Okay. And so walk us through you telling me that the book features, in addition to the quilt patterns, it features kids of all different abilities and shapes and colors and ethnicities.
Right. And the kids are they're in a situation where they see an inspiration for a quilt pattern, and then the inspiration morphs into an actual representation of that quilt. And so what I'm wanting to have is for kids to recognize that things that are created around them are inspired by things that people saw or experienced, and then they put that into their creation. And I encourage the kids to look around them and see what could be an inspiration for their self-expression.
Interesting. What is it? You were saying that you write what you know, write what you're passionate about. What makes you so passionate about quilts?
I grew up at the feet of our daycare provider. We called her Graham Little. And she was making quilts whenever we sat still. We always sat still at 11:30 every day to watch Jeopardy. This was back in the early 60s. So we would sit still every day, either folding socks and towels or cutting quilt squares where we watched Jeopardy. And she would, tell me about the quilts she was making, and she made quilts for every single one of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And she included my family in that group. We were her kids. And I just, there's so much history, and there's something unique about a quilt that has just so much love in it. It takes so much time to make it. The stitch work, if it's done by hand, just takes so long, and there's so much opportunity for being creative with it. Mm-hmm. And I find them really fascinating. I collect quilts. I love going thrift store shopping and finding an old quilt. That's like my favorite thing. Yeah. Garage sailing and antique shops. But my favorites are just finding them in obscure places. One was a garage sale we went to with our son in Minnesota. And the woman had this sawhorse table set up and she threw something over it and then had all her items for sale on it. And I looked at that and oh my gosh, that is the one quilt that I featured in my book that I don't have in my personal collection. And it was just the quilt top. And it was stained and old. And I asked the woman, I said, is this for sale also? And we negotiated a price, and I walked home with a tree of life and was just absolutely thrilled with it.
Oh, that's wonderful. You know, my grandmother, she wasn't into quilting, but she was into crocheting, and she crocheted all of us what she called an Afghan, a big blanket. And I know mine that she crocheted for me when I was maybe 5 or 6, so it's almost 90 years ago, I guess. It was blue and yellow, and it was so dear to me, and it followed me around until it fell apart shortly after I got married. And blankets, and especially something that somebody makes for you and that you know takes time, because my beautiful wife has taken up crocheting, and she recently created a blanket for me, and I know it takes weeks and months to create, and something like that is, at least for me, I mean, that's something that I cherish and worship.
For me, the quilt that Graham Little made for me that I took with me to college was my security blanket. I came from a very small town, less than 1,500 people, and there were 2,000 people in my dormitory alone, let alone the 40,000 people that were on campus. And that quilt, being able to snuggle under that quilt every night was just a piece of home, and it was a hug from home every night. It means the world to me. In fact, I had written a blog once about the quilt that Graham made me, and it was about quilts in general. And I said in the blog, if my house were on fire and I could run inside and grab one thing, it would be my quilt from Graham. Well, we had a fire 2 weeks later.
Oh.
And the firefighters wouldn't let us get near the building. Sure. Mm-hmm. And then there were, we had to have a forensic study done of our fire, so everything was wrapped up and crime scene tape all around it for 2 weeks. And by the time we could finally get into the building, and the firefighters were pulling things out of the building for me, and I knew where that quilt was, and I knew where it would have landed when the floors collapsed. And when those guys came out with that roll of quilts, and Graham quilts, I unrolled it, and there was Graham Little's quilt with just a little bit of singeing around one edge. And I was just like, oh, I will make it through this tragedy, because Graham's quilt made it through this tragedy.
Yeah. Interesting that you're talking about tragedy and this very special quilt helping you get through tragedy. One of the quilts that is foremost in my mind was I think it was referred to as the AIDS quilt that was that traveled around the country, if not the world. Are you familiar with that quilt? And
I am. And the thing that made that quilt so special, in my opinion, was that it wasn't made by like one group. Mm-hmm. It was made by a lot of mothers. A lot of them were made by mothers, but they were made by people who were doing it in remembrance of someone dear to them that they lost to AIDS. And so this huge quilt was this combination of all of this love and all of this honoring and remembrance of the people, by the people who cared about them.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, it got so big that it actually tore in pieces.
I remember seeing a piece that spread across the whole White House lawn. Mm-hmm. And that does sound familiar, what you said about it touring in pieces.
Yeah. And the thing that I think that was most powerful about that quilt, and people who weren't old enough to remember, the AIDS crisis when it first happened, because it was affecting mostly gay men. It didn't get the attention or the care that it should have received. And that quilt, that outpouring of love, really helped humanize the people who were suffering. And I think it did a lot to finally motivate the government to start doing some more research.
Yeah, you can do amazing things by a quiet, gentle protest, if you would be willing to call it that. That was a protest by all those people who lost someone dear to them, saying, please notice this. Please don't just keep pushing this under the carpet.
Yeah. So what kind of conversations do you hope families will have as they're looking at the beautiful illustrations, and what do you see?
Well, there's some of the learning activities that are in the book are specifically made so that they can be used in a classroom setting or in a homeschool setting or just in a family discussion setting. And the one that I think would be real appropriate for families to use to develop conversations is this activity where the illustrator has created a little outline of each of the characters in the book in the back. And my publisher has laid it out so that it's a blank page behind each one of those. And those outlines can be cut out and then either wrapped around a finger and taped or glued to a popsicle stick of sorts. And then the kids, there's a whole series of questions to ask the children who have read the book and have seen all these different characters that says, what do you think they all did last night when they got ready for bed? What did probably every one of these kids do? And then what did they probably all, do to get ready for school this morning? And questions like that everybody has things in common. And so we taught that you do all these leading questions to get the kids to think about the commonalities with all these different kids. And then you ease into what would be a kind thing somebody could do for that person. And then what could you do to help that person be included? And then they take the little finger puppets and they act out different scenarios with the different kids, the little girl in the wheelchair, the boy with the yarmulke, the girl who lives on the reservation, and all these different scenarios. It's endless what you could create. And I think giving kids the opportunity to practice including people and practice being kind is a really important thing for parents to do. And it's a great opportunity for lots of discussion. And that's what I hope this book can do for families.
Yeah. What an interesting and I think really powerful question to ask kids. What do you think this character from the book is doing tonight? What do you think that they had to do in the morning? What do you think you could have done or what you could do for this character if you were going to school together?
Yeah. And that's what it is. It's a springboard for developing discussions and, asking questions and giving kids chances to come up with some creative solutions. I can't wait to hear from families who say that, we did this with our kids and the kids astounded us by saying this and this and that. I would love to hear that someday.
Yeah. Before we go, you obviously you are, and you told us a little bit about why you're so passionate about quilts. You also seem to be very passionate about inspiring kids to see themselves in others and see the humanity of all people. What inspires that passion in you?
In my career as a nurse, I worked on a mental health unit, a lockdown mental health unit, and then was asked by a college if I would teach nursing students on the lockdown mental health unit. And in my orientation for these students, I would say this is behavioral health unit. And so people are in here because they are not behaving in ways that are safe for them or others. And so I want you to see each one of these people that you take care of when you're on the unit. I want you to find whatever it is in you, in your worldview. I said, as I can't tell you to do my worldview. I can tell you as an example that my worldview is Christian. And I see every single one of these patients on our unit as a child of God. And that allows me to see them as someone who is loved, someone who has loved, someone who deserves dignity, and to be treated like a human being rather than a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And that was very, very important to me. And I told them if, it's an unusual clinical rotation to pass, mm-hmm. Because there's so many unmeasurable things. But I said, I need to see that in you. Mm-hmm. I need to see that evolution in your approach to people on the unit for you to be able to pass this semester with me.
Wow. Very, very powerful. Yeah. And Nancy, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about you, find out more about What Do You See, and maybe learn a little bit about about the Quilt Lady.
Okay. I can be found on Facebook as Miss Nancy Wright. I can be found on Instagram as Nancy Bodine. LinkedIn is Nancy Bodine. My webpage is MissNancyWright.com.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited, and we want everybody to check out What Do You See? Developing New Perspectives with Quilt Patterns. And the book was written by our guest, Nancy Bodine. Nancy, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our amazing co-host, Jordan Saley, is scheduled to speak with Cassandra Clare. That's the next episode of the podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, and we want to thank the folks who helped make it so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Nancy Bodine. Please be sure to check out her wonderful book. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Lori Grady, Will Cheever, Jordan Saley, Cassandra Masonet, Stephanie Davila. Of course, I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.